Hi, everybody, and thanks for attending today's presentation. My name is Sophia, and I'm joining today from Montreal, Quebec, the unceded territories of the Ghanaian-Ganaga Nation. I am a McGill grad, currently completing my Pathy Fellowship, which is located on Salt Spring Island, BC. And I have the honor today of introducing Raj Birgi for his final fellowship presentation. I've had the true privilege of getting to know Raj over the course of the fellowship year. Today's presentation will consist of a 20 to 25 minute presentation followed by a 20 to 25 minute Q&A period, which I'll be moderating. Please note that this presentation is being recorded. So a little bit about Raj. After completing his BA in Political Science and IDS at McGill University, Raj embarked on an international youth internship program supported by the Canadian government. The placement was in Uganda and began in March 2020, focusing awards in development and advocacy-based work. After 2 weeks of the internship, the start of the COVID pandemic resulted in the cancellation of all international internships as well as the Pathy Fellowship, and Raj remained in Uganda. Over the next year in Uganda, Raj got the opportunity to work in a large-scale flower and herb farm and in several other projects within agriculture, including supporting smallholder farmers, an infrastructure project, and a healthcare project within the farm. Through this, Raj developed a strong understanding and appreciation of the opportunities and challenges experienced by smallholder farmers and developed a tie to the community around the farm. Through the fellowship, Raj was inspired to find a way to continue his work across the value chain in Uganda. Over the 9-month placement in Uganda, Raj's initiative was multifaceted, working with a variety of nucleus farms, smallholder communities, and companies engaged in insect farming to strengthen their resilience, increase financial and technological literacy, and support strategic expansion. Despite challenges such as military curfew that remained until the end of January and limited cross-country movement, the initiative was both a great learning experience and an impactful project for Raj and his community partners and stakeholders. In navigating this year alongside Raj, he has consistently shown up with true ambition and drive, and also with humor, demonstrating his ability to generously consider all perspectives and to passionately support his community and cohort through this experience. We're really excited to see what you've done this year, Raj. Just a quick reminder, a little housekeeping. Throughout Raj's presentation, we encourage you to make comments and ask questions in the chat box or the comment section of either the Zoom or Facebook live stream. We will be watching these feeds and collating the comments and questions, and I'll be moderating the Q&A period following the presentation. If you're joining us on Zoom, please consider turning off your microphone and cameras to limit background noise and help with connectivity. Should you have any technology concerns, please feel free to let us know via the chat box. And without further ado, I'd like to pass the virtual microphone over to today's presenter, Raj.
Thank you for the introduction, Sophia. Good morning, everyone. Awesome to be here after a long time. For me, it's been almost been 3 years since I first applied for the initiative back in, I think, October 2019. To this day, where I'm presenting on the work I've done over the last year. So it's been a long time coming, and I'm super happy to be here. As Sophia said, it's been quite a journey the last 3 years. As you can see on this picture, the little background, the green background there is a farm. And so when I moved to Uganda for a short 6-month internship, I was meant to go there and support in a women's advocacy organization, but it got cancelled. And 2 weeks later, I was left stranded in Uganda with no job, no internship, and really no reason to stay. But a good friend of mine had allowed me to stay in the house, and they owned a farm. And it was this farm that I got a chance to volunteer on for a few months during COVID when I had nothing else to do. And funnily enough, that was a chance, a really good chance for me, and a time for me where a lot of my perspectives changed, a lot of my career ambitions, my ties to community changed. You see, after graduating from university at McGill, I always wanted to come back to Africa, to Kenya. As somebody born and raised in Kenya and spending most of their life moving between Canada, the West, and Kenya, Africa, I always wanted to find a way to bridge these two very distinct places and find a way to make ties to community and create impact. Through this farm, which employed more than 700 people and had massive community impact, generational impact, in fact, over 3 generations, 70 years of existence, I finally got a perspective, got a chance to see what the realities of one community in Uganda is all about, the challenges, the opportunities, some of the daily problems that they go through, and some of the incredible opportunities for livelihood development, for community development, for economic development. And so I spent a year on that farm prior to the fellowship, and that was a great learning experience, and it was a very inspiring time for me. So I was part of the original cohorts of the Pathy Fellowship of 2020 to 2021, and that got pushed. And so I changed my idea, I pitched, and I began to start a new project with my new community ties in Uganda. So, like I said, it was a very interesting year, and it's been a long time coming. So this was the original farm that I was working at. It was about an hour and a half north of Kampala, and it was a farm that's been founded 70 years ago. Beautiful green space here, as you can see. And so this is where I developed a greater understanding of the agricultural value chain. I worked with so many different stakeholders, both at higher levels and at grassroots levels. And this was very inspiring for me. So when I talk about my why for my initiative, it starts at a personal level. It starts at a level where I've always wanted to do something to find a way to bridge this gap. I never knew how it would look like, what it would look like. I never knew who would facilitate it. And so this passion of going back was really sparked by the fellowship. The fellowship gave me an incredible opportunity to do something that I thought I would have to do much later in my career. But rather, I could do it very early in my career, which is go back, learn more about grassroots development, learn more about impact, community development. And it was a dream come true in that sense. The why on my initiative was also very much influenced by my time at the farm. I had very mixed understandings of development, as most international development students do when they graduate from development. I understood it in paper and through the readings, but I never understood what it would look like. Oh no, sorry. In reality. And so the initiative gave me a great opportunity to understand what development looks like in the context of both macro and micro context, and how something like agriculture, which employs 80% of the workforce in Uganda, almost 80% of the entire workforce or communities in the whole of Africa. I was then curious about how that can be transformative for livelihoods, for individuals. And that's where both my personal and my initiative whys came together to find a project where I would be able to learn more about communities and try and create an impact. So my initiative was multifaceted, but there were two primary aspects to my initiative. One was planned before the initiative, and the other one kind of came out of the blue as a great opportunity. So the first one was Smallholder Outreach, and the second one was an insect farming consultancy that I did. And so I'm going to expound on both of them as I move on. But these were the two main aspects of my fellowship. They both had different aspects to them. One was very much grassroots, working with smallholders. The other one was more top level, working with a startup. And so let me get into that. So for my first aspect of the initiative, which is a smallholder outreach, the core of the initiative was working with large farms that are called nucleus farms and partnering with many of their partners, and their partners are smallhold farmers. Now, smallhold farmers are farmers who traditionally own between half an acre to an acre and a half of land. They live on the land that they farm in, and their produce makes up their livelihood. These make up the large majority of farmers in Africa. These are subsistence farmers, and agriculture thus is the backbone of their communities, and eventually of the economy itself. So working with these smallholder farmers was really, really important because they make up the backbone of the economy in many ways, but they are also very much underserved in many ways. A lot of the funding, a lot of the support goes for large, commercial farms rather than the smallholders who make up most of the exports and the produce in the country. So when we worked with a collaborating partner called Uganda Agribusiness Alliance, and we worked with a variety of nucleus farms and their smallholders. And so using these different stakeholders, what we wanted to do was employ some capacity building tools and to strengthen some aspects of the nucleus farms and their smallholders. And what we did is through through community collaboration and discussions with the nucleus farms, we outlined three main aspects: digital inclusion, gender inclusion, and climate smart agriculture being the three principal aspects that we covered in our training, alongside more technical training, such as planting techniques, nursery techniques, irrigation, farm management. And so we took a very rounded approach to working with the community and understanding what their needs would be in terms of where they would like to focus on. So these were really different. These are three very different topics, and topics that are not necessarily covered in the Ugandan context, and that made them really important. So I think I can give an example on digital inclusion. So we did a workshop in November over 1 week, and it was an incredible success. We brought over 50, 60 farmers together from all over the Mityana region. And this is a very rare opportunity to bring smallholders together, because normally there are many constraints. There's resources, there's the ability to fund the workshop, there's ability to organize the accommodation, the food, and all of that was funded for through collaboration with UAA and the initiative itself. And so we brought these smallholders together for a week, and from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. we had a variety of different lessons over 5 days, and a lot of them were led by the smallholders themselves. We had group projects, we had different kinds of presentations, all to encourage knowledge sharing, all to encourage new lessons between the community. And this is where a lot of these topics of climate smart agriculture or gender inclusion or digital inclusion all came up to light. So something cool that we did on the digital inclusion is we partnered with a up and coming startup called Easy Agric that is based in East Africa. And what they do is they facilitate digital transformation in agriculture. And so almost all of the smallholders possessed an Android smartphone. And during this workshop, we introduced Easy Agric, the app, to them. And we taught them how to map their gardens. So this is a very small thing, but it's a very significant thing, because using their phone, they were able to pinpoint, as in walk in a rectangle and draw their garden, draw their farm. And for the first time, despite gardening there for maybe 10 years, 20 years, they were able to pinpoint exactly how many hectares of land that they have, how many hectares with papaya, how many with cassava, with tomatoes. And they were able to understand what their land looks like. Through that, and the app, the training we gave, they were able to then pinpoint what production they were expecting over the 3-month harvest period. They were able to plan their fertilizer purchasing, because they knew exactly how much fertilizer is required based on the spacing of the land. It's a very simple tool, and something that we it wasn't very difficult to teach, and there was a lot of eagerness to learn, and it was really interesting employing a digital tool like this because the impacts were quite significant. So that was just one example of a digital tool. We continued with follow-up sessions and field visits, and that was a great example. So this is some pictures of our large workshop that we did. Many different kinds of group activities. We did several other trainings, including a pack house training. So working with the pack house, which is kind of the heartbeat of a farm, and trying to support some of their capacity building, including gender inclusion and climate smart agriculture. We worked with a variety of different partners to help with the knowledge, because a lot of this knowledge was technical. And so we had a few partners that were supporting us here. So this was a really cool project. We, like, one of the most impactful parts of this workshop specifically was we did a privilege walk, but I modified the privilege walk to Ugandan cultural context. And it was the first time that obviously a lot of the farmers had done such an activity. And for me, I've done it many times growing up in Canada, but it was very interesting, drawing up the questions for a privilege walk that was gender-based with the Ugandan context. And it was a very, very interesting experience. The types of things the questions that I asked, like, take a step forward. If your bank account is in your own name, or if your land deed is in your own name. And it was very, very interesting in drawing up these questions and seeing the reactions, and quite beautiful, and that was a great experience, I think. So that was the first part of my initiative. Alongside this initiative, I got an opportunity to work with a startup called Protein. Now, I worked with this startup on a consultancy basis. So for several months, I began in the company to try and support them. Now, this is a super, super, super interesting company. They're called Protein, and what they do is they use insect farming, and they use innovative insect farming and insect technology to turn Kampala's organic waste into valuable agricultural fertilizer and byproducts. And these byproducts are then redirected to smallholders, such as coffee farmers and smallhold, like piggeries, and different kinds of animal farms as well. And this was a super cool experience, because essentially what they do is they bring all of this waste together in one warehouse, and then they introduce flies and maggots to the waste, and the flies and the maggots eat the waste, and the maggot poop becomes fertilizer, and the maggots themselves becomes feed. A fully circular, incredible solution that was, on average taking up 15 tons of organic waste from the market, but actually diverting it into valuable agricultural byproducts. So this is the process that was going on. So my role in the initiative in Protein was helping them develop some sort of expansion plan and helping them strengthen their smallholder outreach. So for several months, we worked together to develop something called a Turnkey Solution. And the vision of the startup was to develop a turnkey replicable product of organic waste to byproduct system that can be replicated across Uganda, where you can take it to rural municipalities or smaller municipalities and give them a solution to their organic waste, and partner with smallholders to then redirect the waste into into fertilizer and other byproducts. So while my first part of the initiative was working directly with smallholders, directly in community, this part of the initiative was very different. It focused on a bit more of a strategy approach, on a financial approach, on trying to understand how they can effectively convert waste into fertilizer and market it properly, market it to smallholders, distribute it across the country, And it was a very, very different approach, but something I appreciated a lot. The work that's being done in a place like Uganda within the agricultural value chain is across the whole value chain. So there's so many different ways that you can get involved in the value chain. This was an incredible opportunity for me to understand, the challenges and opportunities of a startup. How do they scale in the context of Uganda? How do they, overcome the challenges of, for instance, the Kampala City Council, and collect waste from the council and then redirect it, and the manufacturing process. And so in these pictures, you can kind of see these are the 5 stages of larvae, from maggot to fly. These are the small maggots. And these are the smallholder bins that we would provide to different smallholders, where they can take their own organic waste, and we would give them the larvae, and they would then produce their organic waste into fertilizer themselves. So you're creating a fully independent and circular solution. What you see down here is something called frass. So frass is a byproduct of when you introduce organic waste to maggots. They meet, the maggots eat the organic waste, and they produce frass. Frass is their poop, and it's organic fertilizer. It is pure, beautiful fertilizer that can be used for many smallhold crops. And so these are the many crates of frass that would be eventually produced after the introduction of maggot to the waste. So as you can imagine, this was something super different, super new for me, but nonetheless, an awesome experience. And so a little bit about my timeline. So I can quickly zoom through this, but I was running two parts of these initiatives concurrently. And the first part in September was a lot of brainstorming and community development work, working with the nucleus farms and their smallholders in identifying what should be our curriculum, what should be our focus points for the year. This is where topics of gender inclusion and digital and climate smart agriculture all came up. These are topics that were not covered in many other, capacity building exercises. All the stakeholders were super excited for that. So we did several trainings in September. In November, we moved on to much of the field work and the workshop phases. So we held several workshops, 2 large workshops in November, including the 1-week-long workshop and then smaller packhouse workshops. All of these were fully funded for the participants. Participants would receive certificates upon completion. We would work together to develop a take-home plan so that they're leaving with a concrete plan on how they go back to their homestead, back to their smallhold farm, and implement some of their tools. And that's where some of our follow-up and MEL came in with their take-home plans. November was also when I got involved with Protein and began understanding their business. In February, with UAA, we continued working with smallholders, and this is where our focus on easy agri and digital inclusion came in. We did several field visits to help develop the mapping tool and some of the other tools like the diagnostic tools on the apps. And with Protein, this was a really cool, exciting time. We were working with the municipality of Kampala, as well as the largest coffee exporter in Uganda and by virtue in Africa, where they purchased like 4 months supply of all of the fertilizer produced by Protein. So it was a very exciting time because all of the products was purchased. And so we were in a position where how do we improve the manufacturing process? How do we bring in more waste from different markets across the city? How do we strengthen the process of, having enough flies, so we have enough maggots, so we have enough waste, fertilizer at the end. I can tell you something about working at Protein. It was the smelliest place I've ever worked at. It was awful. I've never been to a place where if you walk in for 5 minutes, like the smell of the waste would just stick to your clothes. And when you go anywhere after that, your 5 minutes there, you would smell like waste and maggots. It was nasty. But I did have my own gumboots and my own a jumpsuit, so that was an exciting time. Never had my own pair of gumboots before. Um, and yeah, that was really fun, being part of a team that's trying to drive so much change within the agricultural value chain. And so my initiative ended up with a lot of report writing and evaluation. So in April 2022, I finished a 10-year financial and strategy projection for Protein to help them expand moving forward, to help them support different municipalities and make their warehouse replicable wherever they go. That was really exciting. For UAA, we also underwent some MEL and refining the first year of the project for future years to come. So it was awesome. It was a great experience. There was a lot I learned. There was a lot of challenges. Yeah, the main challenge achievements I felt were the scale of the workshops that we held. It's not often that smallholders get this opportunity in such a setting, and so it was a very, very good achievement for us to be able to bring and encourage knowledge sharing. When we did bring these smallholders together, I didn't have much to say in many ways. I'm not, a technical expert. There were challenges of, understanding different positionality aspects, but the process of bringing farmers together to share their own knowledge was, I think, the biggest spark there. There were a lot of storytelling between different little groups. There was a lot of sharing on experiences. And that was, I think, the most, powerful achievement. And this happened in all the different workshops that we had. I was quite happy with the way we were able to bring in a gender split, though it's not 50-50, and it is difficult to achieve a 50-50 gender split considering how patriarchal some of these smallholder communities are. I give you an example. In many of the smallholder communities, you'd have a family working on the entire homestead. And so the mother may be left behind with the responsibilities while the father may come for a workshop like this. And collect the transport allowance, collect some of this. But that was a difficult space to navigate. But I think we tried to do our best in encouraging gender split. There were some workshops that had a better 50-50 gender split. I think another great achievement was the digital app. To be able to work with a partner like Easy Agric and facilitate the meeting of different stakeholders was a great accomplishment. It's not often that you're able to implement digital tools successfully in this context. And so that was a great, and it's something that the communities is going to continue to work with our collaborating partner. With Protein, I developed a turnkey solution for them. And so that was really, really cool. They got an offer of more than $2 million to scale up their expansion by the EU. And so I was helping out with developing the funding proposals, conceptualizing their turnkey solution. So that was a great achievement for me. Some of the challenges included the curfew. So like Sophia may have mentioned, there was a curfew in place and it was a 7 p.m. curfew. So it was quite strict until January, I think the 21st of January. And it limited a lot of the types of workshops we could hold, and that was one of the main reasons I also took in the Protein project, because cross-county movement was restricted. There were limits on passengers on the vehicles, and so it loosened up towards the end. But this is still a curfew that disproportionately impacts those in rural areas, and so it was a challenging space to navigate. But we managed to work with it by following a lot of SOPs and so. Another challenge I faced moving from Canada to Uganda was pace. Things work at a different pace. Initiatives moves much more slowly, and so when you're in the context of moving a project forward, go, 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 it being the only thing on your mind is not something that is easy, especially when a community like smallholder farmers have a lot more on their plate, which is, it's harvesting season, or it's planting season in February. So there's a lot of factors that make the pace difficult to move forward, that are out of your control, because you're working in a very dynamic, very vibrant community that has a lot of complex realities. Positionality was a great lesson for me, and a challenge. I was coming from a large commercial farm where there are many things that I didn't really consider as challenges, such as access to irrigation water, or access to machinery like hoes and digging equipment. And so when I did come into the context of working with smallholder farmers, I really, really had to be aware of my positionality. And it did take me some time to understand that the community, despite me being in the community before, the community challenges are very different from what I imagined. And so learning them and really putting the community members in the spotlight, allowing them to facilitate knowledge sharing rather than leading it yourself, was probably the biggest lesson I learned there. And I think we learned that throughout the fellowship, but I really put it into practice. Some of my learnings was, I was really shocked and incredibly amazed by the eagerness to learn. Now, when you hold such a workshop in Uganda, it's very rare to have 100% attendance over 100% of the days. From 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., every participant was there for the whole day, and it was incredible to see. It was long, tiring days, but the eagerness to absorb new knowledge, to learn from each other was incredible. Another learning was that, yeah, like I said before, there's a lot of basic challenges that do remain, obstacles to smallholder development and growth. Support from municipalities and from a lot of different stakeholders is not there. And so smallholders are really left to work within their community to provide solutions, to create solutions. I give you an example. Over the last 3 months, fertilizer prices have tripled or quadrupled all over the world, and this disproportionately affects smallholder communities. So finding ways to adjust to that, like something we had learned, because chemical costs are really expensive. One of the smallholders was giving the example of how they boil neem and chili and cow dung together to create an organic pesticide. And so we shared the recipe. We did a little bit of a workshop on how to use and how to make and use that pesticide. And so the rest of the community took home those lessons and were able to implement those organic pesticides. One of the last learnings was finding circular solutions, always finding ways to improve resilience in a circular way rather than through dependency. And this I learned a lot at Protein. So at Protein, yeah, we had a strong impact on how much fertilizer we produced, how much waste we diverted. I think this is more than 1,000 tons now, which is a significant amount of carbon removed from the environment. So that was really, really awesome. And I know I'm short on time, so I wanted to finish up with some of my personal learning journeys. So for me, this fellowship was special because it allowed me to take a very bottom-up grassroots approach, which was different from my previous experience and more impactful than a lot of my previous experiences. I was able to work with communities, in communities, and learn from communities rather than being in a management position where I make decisions and drive change. You're not the one driving change necessarily because you're not in the seat. You're just a passenger that's there to, help the car move and oil the wheels a little bit, but you're not on the driving seat there. And that's a very beautiful experience. I really prioritized rounded personal growth. And so living in a new country, living alone, there were some challenges there, but I was able to do something that I've always wanted to do, which was a Vipassana meditation retreat. So kind of It's a 7-day silent retreat, which was remarkable, and a great opportunity for me to take a break from the initiative itself and to focus on myself. And that was awesome. Inclusive leadership was a skill that I learned, and teamwork. I definitely got the chance to focus on a different type of leadership from my previous leadership at the farm. It's okay, you can pause. And so that was great. Like, you're working with teams rather than managing teams, and it was something that was a priority and one of the guiding principles of the initiative prior. And I think moving through the initiative, it was a great lesson. Inclusive leadership is obviously it's a tricky place to navigate because you don't necessarily know how to do it. It comes from experience and working and lifting up others. And in this context, the workshops were really helpful in that. And so, yeah, that was awesome. Also, some challenges personally. It's always difficult to live in a new country, adapt to a new country. The curfew, the movement restrictions, all of these do play a part in making the experience a bit more challenging, but also a bit more rewarding. You don't have a lot of the easy systems that you may have here in Canada, so you have to adapt and learn on your feet. So stability was definitely a challenge. I got homesick and stuff, but I managed to make a home out of anywhere. And so my final learning was, I was really happy with the flexibility and resilience I showed to live in that type of context, where there were a lot of environmental challenges, but still try and work with community and in community. I learned a lot about budgeting, and that's thanks to Adam and the fellowship, a lot about like where I'm spending my money, how I'm spending my money, and discipline there. And I'm happy with that lesson. I hope to take it forward with me as I move on. And I learned a lot about teamwork and leadership, because this was a completely different type of teamwork and leadership that I've ever been exposed to. And I think it's going to impact however I lead and work in teams moving forward, forever. So I can't ever turn a blind eye on this, because it's always going to shape how I work in teams. So that's that. What's next? UAA will continue this project. We did some MEL to refine what we did on the first year, and they're going to move it forward, working with new nucleus farms and new communities of smallholders. We did a handover with a new gender specialist. So a lot of the work that we did is going to move forward. With protein, they have great things coming for them. Hopefully they're going to expand and sequester more waste and produce more fertilizer as they move forward. I'll be starting a job in about 6 weeks time, 1st of July, with McKinsey in Nairobi. So I get a good chance to go back to Kenya and find a way to, again, learn more about different communities, about different industries, and work towards my goal of starting a social enterprise over the next few years that creates genuine impact across communities and puts people first. So I think this was a great step towards that goal of starting a social enterprise. It's definitely going to be a pivotal moment for me. I kind of know what I want to do in the near future. So all of this is just learning and learning and learning. And so yeah, it's super exciting for me as well. Thank you for that. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Raj. That was amazing. You have accomplished so much this year, despite lots of challenges, like you said. So just everyone, feel free to put any questions in the chat if you have any. But I have a few, definitely, to get started. So working on this project or this initiative, you worked with two very different kind of aspects of what agricultural sustainability and smallholder farming can look like. And so I'm wondering how you felt these projects kind of worked in tandem together, and were there lessons you learned in either one of them that you could bring to or apply in the other?
Thanks for the question, Sophia. Yeah, I think definitely they were two very different approaches. It's like going to two different offices, but what I learned working with smallholders on their challenges of affordable fertilizer, affordable inputs, um, access to resources, definitely complemented my knowledge when working with protein and understanding how do you create like a smallholder unit for them to produce their own fertilizer. And so our target market in protein was very much what I was working with the smallholders. And so I learned a lot about, for instance, yeah, like how do we implement this smallholder? We wanted to create like independent barrels where they can make their own fertilizer, essentially using their own organic waste. And so this little project that we did was definitely like all of the knowledge on some of the challenges that are faced of sustainability, of resilience, informed that way. And it went the other way too. Like what I learned at Protein helped me approach how I was working with smallholders, because um, there's a lot of like we had to do a lot of projections and a lot of estimations using figures on waste and the manufacturing process, and we were able to like help develop templates for budgeting and for projections on harvesting as well with Easy Agric. So the approaches are different. One is a bit more top down, one is a bit more focusing on a larger, like a startup, but they definitely complemented and they gave me two different understandings of similar problems. So yeah, that I'm glad I got to experience both of them. It made the initiative a lot more fulfilling to be able to understand problems from different lenses.
Amazing. And just to follow up with that, I'm wondering, because you were in two different spheres, what did you learn about project management that through this process that you would maybe like to share with others or apply as you kind of kickstart your career going forward?
Um, I guess at Protein, I learned about project management in terms of, well, I came in and there was a startup team there. And so uh, we did this incredible exercise of going entirely through the process of, what happens when a vegetable farmer or a seller in the market disposes their waste, what happens in the many, many processes up to it being produced as fertilizer and then being sent back to smallholders. So we analyze this whole beautiful circular chain of yeah of waste. And what I learned from project management there is a lot of the devil is in the details, and working or trying to understand these processes is really helpful in trying to make them better and making them smoother and more efficient. And all you're thinking about is efficiency. How do we get from here to here most efficiently as possible? And we had one goal, like reduce our costs, increase our production, and produce more fertilizer and distribute more to coffee farmers. So we had like a very like a bottom line goal there, and that was a different kind of project management experience as the smallholder outreach program, which was a lot more taking feedback and helping others drive the project and letting the project take a life of its own. While here it's a lot more like you're kind of in charge of how you improve it yourself. So yeah, they're very different experiences, which is cool.
Yeah, for sure. It's really great to have kind of those different perspectives and to be able to take the best parts from each and apply them to each other. So that's a really amazing experience that you had. I'm really curious now, thinking more about the kind of smallholder aspect of your initiative. Um, I'm really curious about what was the actual kind of feedback or response from the farmers, especially after
Mm.
that week-long workshop that you put on, and those activities. Like, what kind of was the feedback from the activities, like the privilege walk? I'm super curious
Mhm.
about. Yeah, what were you hearing from the community? What was the response from the community?
So the feedback, as when I started doing my reflection, I realized the feedback is always going to be mixed. It's never
Mhm.
going to be wholly positive, and there's reasons for that. So there was a lot of positive feedback in the sense that these were concepts that were rarely covered in this way, in this fashion, in the context of agriculture. So all of the knowledge, all of the knowledge sharing exercises were knowledge that was they were aware of, but they would never speak about it due to cultural reasons or due to a variety of reasons. So the feedback on that side was positive. On the privilege work was, I think, something that never done before, and yeah, it's quite fun workshop. Like everyone's laughing, everyone's it's almost a sensitive topic that everyone starts laughing. It's that it's a very different, I guess, way of doing things. But at the same time, there was some more mixed feedback, because when it comes to something like climate smart agriculture, smallholders need concrete steps, concrete plans, concrete tools that facilitate their work, that allow them to be more efficient, reduce their waste, stop using harmful chemicals. And the ability to provide that was not necessarily always there. It's difficult to become a provider of actual inputs, of affordable inputs, because that's not why the workshop is there necessarily. It's more for knowledge sharing and education and capacity building. So bridging the gap between capacity building and actually providing either funding or resources or tools for smallholders then becomes a challenge. But I think using ABCD, we were able to really facilitate knowledge sharing. Like I gave you the example of the organic pesticide. There were other examples there on like water retention and how they would cut their trees or keep their trees. But again, like, yeah, you can't solve all of you can't address a lot of the key systemic barriers that exist. And that comes off as part of the mixed feedback, because it's not in your power and it's not in their power. And this is the challenge with developing countries. There are like structural root problems of inequality, especially in rural areas, especially among smallholder farmers. So, and a lot of it is gendered, and a lot of it is very complex. So you can't address those per se. And obviously it's a tricky one, because yeah.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. Yeah, for sure. That is, it's a complicated situation to be in. And it's great also, I think, to have both negative and positive feedback, because there's always something to learn from that. Do you mind actually stop sharing your screen, by the way?
Sure.
I forgot. Just so we can see you a bit better. My next question is, I was looking at your slides when you were planning out kind of the intentions for the UAA initiative. You talk about in the climate smart agriculture section, you talk about youth engagement in the initiative. And I'm curious if you want to touch about, I didn't necessarily see a ton of youth in the photos. And so I'm just curious, was that a challenge? Why is that important in climate smart agriculture in that context? And what's the kind of, is that something that will be taken on in the future?
Yeah, so the youth engagement part, so essentially the way we would define youth engagement is anyone under 35. And the large majority of smallholder farmers are under 35, but because smallholder farming happens in a community and family setting, when a workshop like this happens, the youth are not going to get the privilege of participating, but rather it'll be the head of households or the head of a patriarchal household. So that was definitely a challenge to kind of to bring youth directly at the forefront. It's a lot more challenging, I realize, and this was another lesson I had, is that bringing youth to the forefront requires going directly to the communities, which wasn't possible because of COVID and vaccines, and like the population was not vaccinated at the time and still isn't so much. So it was quite challenging going into rural areas. And so, yeah, it was definitely a limitation of how we wanted to approach it. But at the same time, I think we did get a good amount of under 35 youth. I want to say more than half, even though it doesn't look like it, more than half are under 35, where yeah, they would be engaged in. And they were actually those that were more interested in the climate smart agriculture. But I do want to say that having a combination of different age groups was beneficial, because when we talk about climate change and we talked about how rainy seasons have altered and patterns of harvest and crop have changed, and we went into the more technical aspects, it was having a lot of the older, there was some much older people there, participants, and they were able to share a lot of the wisdom on, look, my harvest has gone from 2 kgs of chilies to half a kilo. And it never used to be like this. And rainy season, it's now November, it should be, rainy season, but it's not. It's 35 degrees outside. So there was a lot of knowledge sharing facilitated by, I guess, inadvertently having a diverse age group there.
Yeah, for sure. The intergenerational piece is really critical too with knowledge sharing, and especially in a local context. So
yeah, especially in Uganda, where the average age is, I mean, the life expectancy is just above 60 something, and the average age is 16 and a half years old. There's, in the context of knowledge sharing, intergenerational knowledge is very, very important. It's just the dynamic of the population, so and of the communities. So it's quite incredible, for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. A huge part of your project was this digital technology aspect, and so I'm curious just in how that part of the initiative turned out in practice, and kind of, can you speak a bit more on your focus on this digital inclusion a little more, and what the solutions or accessibility measures you implemented to assist these farmers in leveraging digital tools in their farming? How did that work out? Yeah.
So when we talk about digital tools, I think there's two things in this question. One is, its effectiveness, and two is accessibility. So I want to talk about accessibility first. Smartphone accessibility in communities like this is really, really, really high. There are these Chinese smartphones that are, flooding the market, and they're very affordable, and almost every participant that was in that workshop had a rudimentary smartphone. I think the ownership of smartphones in areas like this is really, really high, and it's growing annually. So that was really, really good to see, because through the smartphone, through very cheap, like Easy Agric would provide free internet, free data to everyone who would use the app. So that really facilitated, that would be the main limitation, not the smartphone, but the internet bundles to do that. So that was facilitated through Easy Agric. In terms of effectiveness or how we used it, there were some really cool aspects there. So for instance, on the Easy Agric app, we worked with the smallholders, and they, for instance, one of their main crop was cassava. Cassava is a short-term starch that is really popular. And on the app, they would be able to, press cassava, and there would be several sections of both videos and text in English and Luganda, which is one of the local languages. And it would talk about, okay, this is the planting technique, this is the digging technique, these are some main crop inspection points, this is what some normal pest damage would look like, this is why it would, these are the reasons and the causes. And so there were all these instructional pieces of knowledge which were there both in video and reading format. Some of them were not there, so we worked with Easy Agric to develop it, because the large majority of our smallholders in the community were on a specific crop like papaya, and so and chilies, and so we helped develop this these how-tos and the text version. And so it does become useful. It's still not very natural yet to be able to lean on digital tools. It's still a dominance of knowledge first, of intergenerational knowledge that's being used, but to modernize, which is important in many ways, to increase their yield, to increase production, and on the technical aspect, it's still quite important to help push new knowledge and new education. But it wasn't very easy all the time, for sure, because it's not, it's definitely a new frontier.
Yeah, and there'll be peaks and valleys along the way for sure. We just had a question from Sarah. We have a few minutes left, so we'll just wrap up with this one, I think. From Sarah, the Vipassana retreat sounds like such a special experience. What did you take away, and were there any insights that were applicable to your experience this year in community?
Thanks for the question, Sarah. Yeah, it was a really crazy experience. Like 7 days of nonstop like silence and meditation. Waking up at 4:30, sleeping at 9 on wooden beds. So it was a very humbling, very beautiful experience through and through. And leaving community, entering that space, and then re-entering community, when you work in development, you working in communities, in smallholding communities where there's a lot of income inequality, it starts to really impact you over time. There's a lot of practitioners here at Cody, I'm sure, who have worked in communities, worked in a variety of different communities, and I'm sure that they also feel the same, that it does happen to impact you at some extent. It impacts your goals, your ambitions, your personal outlook, how you see life, your drive. But then leaving that space and entering a space of like individual stillness, not focusing on community, but focusing on the self, was a very interesting contrast, because you come to terms or come to peace with a lot of things, and you then can re-enter community without shouldering the burdens or the challenges of the community, because you're at peace or at stillness, at a much more sustainable level. And you don't get depressed by what you'd see. It doesn't impact you at a very deep level, because you achieve some sort of stillness or detachment from everything you see, and then you can then re-enter community reinvigorated, re-energized, with a lot more hope and passion for the things that you do. So yeah, that's one way to look at it. It was very individual based rather than community based.
Yeah, wow, that sounds like an amazing experience. A little admiration from Nyla. Congrats on all your work this year, Raj, and thanks for sharing your learnings with us.
Nala.
So just to wrap up, we're just about at the end of our time. First of all, Raj, amazing work. Congratulations. Thank you so much for sharing this year with us and all the work that you've done. It's been such an amazing ride. So thanks for letting us share in that. And thank you everyone for attending and participating. It's been great to share this with, I think, the whole community here. This presentation is recorded and can be found on Facebook and on our YouTube page as well. And there's our last, I think it's our last presentation of the cohort coming up right after this, I think at 11 a.m. EST. That's Nivatha's presentation, so definitely come by and watch that. So yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks, Raj.
Thank you for moderating, Sophia. Thank you,
My
everyone. See
pleasure.
you soon.